Cheers takes place in a Boston bar. The Office takes place in a paper company in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Brooklyn Nine-Nine takes place in a police precinct. On the surface, these shows have almost nothing in common. Different decades, different tones, different visual styles, completely different casts of characters chasing completely different lives. And yet, if you strip away the surface, underneath every single one of them, you'll find the exact same skeleton. The same invisible architecture, built from a small set of rules so consistent that industry professionals can actually diagram it, scene by scene, minute by minute, almost like a blueprint. Writers have a name for the version of this that never changes, no matter how much the world around it shifts. Status quo is God. And once you understand what that phrase actually means, you'll start noticing the exact same hidden machinery running underneath every sitcom you've ever loved. Here's the part that tends to surprise people the most. This formula isn't really about jokes at all, even though jokes are what you remember. It's about something closer to physics, an entire system engineered so that no matter how much chaos erupts inside a 22-minute episode, everything has to snap back into place by the time the credits roll. And once you know how to spot that snap, you'll never watch a sitcom quite the same way again. By the end of this video, you'll understand the actual architecture, the character math, and the joke mechanics that professional comedy writers rely on. Whether they're building a workplace comedy, a family sitcom, or a show that insists, famously, that it's about nothing at all. Let's start with the engine underneath everything else: conflict, and specifically, a very particular kind of conflict. Every functioning sitcom character needs two things to exist at all: a want and an obstacle standing between them and that want. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but this single principle is often described by comedy writing instructors as the actual source of every joke that follows. A character without a want is boring, because there's nothing pulling them forward. A want without an obstacle is just as boring, because there's nothing stopping them. And stories about people effortlessly getting what they want tend to produce very little comedy at all. It's the friction between the two, the want, and whatever keeps blocking it, that generates the actual material. Comedy writing analysts sometimes describe this using what they call the three pillars of comedy: conflict, desperation, and the unpredictable. Conflict is the clash itself, two characters wanting incompatible things in the same room. Desperation raises the stakes of that clash just high enough that the character can't simply walk away or shrug it off, because comedy tends to live in situations people feel trapped inside rather than situations they can easily escape. And the unpredictable is the twist that keeps an audience from simply seeing the outcome coming from a mile away. Take away any one of those three ingredients, and the scene tends to go flat, even if the dialogue is technically clever. This is also why sitcom writers obsess so heavily over what's sometimes called internal versus external obstacles. An external obstacle is another character, or a rule, or a physical situation blocking the way. Your boss refusing to approve a vacation request, a landlord threatening eviction, a rival coworker undermining you in a meeting. An internal obstacle lives entirely inside the character themselves. Insecurity, pride, jealousy, a fear of looking foolish in front of someone they're attracted to. The very best sitcom writing tends to stack both at once, giving a character an external roadblock that specifically triggers their worst internal instinct. So the character isn't just failing to get what they want, they're actively sabotaging themselves while trying to get it. That combination, watching someone become their own worst enemy in real time, is quietly one of the most reliable comedy engines ever discovered. Now here's where the architecture gets genuinely strange, and it's the part almost no casual viewer consciously notices. No matter how badly that conflict spirals during the episode, it almost always has to resolve back to exactly where it started. Industry analysts and television scholars refer to this as status quo is God, and it's treated less like a stylistic preference and more like an actual law the format obeys. A sitcom episode can absolutely let its characters chase a promotion, fall into a scheme, tell a lie that spirals wildly out of control, or seemingly get exactly what they wanted. But by the closing minutes, that gain almost always evaporates, quietly reset, so next week's episode can start from the same stable foundation all over again. Television scholars have pointed out that a huge number of sitcom endings follow an identical two-part shape. First, a resolution, where the character briefly gets what they wanted, followed immediately by what's sometimes called a come-down, a twist that gently erases the win and restores the world to normal. It's less a story about change than a story about the comfort of things staying exactly the same, over and over, with slightly different disguises each week. There's a very practical reason this rule became so ironclad in the first place, beyond pure creative philosophy. For decades, broadcast sitcoms were designed to survive syndication, meaning individual episodes needed to air completely out of order on different channels in different markets without confusing anyone. If characters permanently changed, got married, lost a job, or moved across the country in episode 12, and a rerun happened to air episode 4 right afterward, audiences would be hopelessly lost. Keeping the world reliably static wasn't just an artistic choice. It was survival infrastructure for an entire business model built on rerun. So if the emotional shape of a sitcom almost always resets, where does the actual sense of forward momentum inside a single episode come from? This is where the format's precise, almost mathematical structure takes over. Most single sitcom episodes are built on a 3-act structure, broken up by the commercial breaks that used to interrupt broadcast television, bookended by 2 smaller pieces most viewers never consciously label: the cold open and the tag. The cold open is the scene that plays before the opening credits even appear. No music, no title card, just a burst of story or a standalone joke, meant to hook the audience immediately, sometimes connected to the main plot, sometimes a completely unrelated bit of comedy designed purely to set the tone for the episode ahead. Act 1 introduces the problem. Act 2 escalates it, usually by having the characters try to solve it in a way that backfires and makes everything considerably worse. Act 3 resolves the main plot line and quietly restores the world to its resting state. Then comes the tag, a short scene after the main story wraps, often existing purely to deliver one last joke, a final punctuation mark, sending the audience off laughing, rather than ending on the emotional beat of the resolution itself. Layered on top of that structure is something writers call the A story, B story, and sometimes C story, essentially running multiple plots of different sizes simultaneously within the same 22 minutes. The A story usually carries the main emotional or comedic weight of the episode, involving the lead characters directly. The B story is a smaller, often unrelated plot involving supporting characters, frequently used as a palate cleanser, breaking up the pacing of the main story and giving side characters something meaningful to do. Sometimes writers deliberately design the B story to thematically echo the A story, a quieter, smaller version of the same lesson or joke playing out in a completely different context, so the episode feels unified, even though 2 entirely separate stories are technically happening at once. Now let's zoom all the way in, from the architecture of an entire episode down to the architecture of a single joke, because that structure is just as rigidly formulaic, even if it feels completely spontaneous when it's performed well. The most fundamental unit is the setup and the punchline. The setup plants an expectation in the audience's mind, quietly establishing what feels like the obvious, predictable direction a sentence or situation is heading. The punchline then violates that expectation, usually as abruptly as possible, revealing an alternate meaning or outcome the audience didn't see coming. Comedy instructors sometimes break this down even further into a 3-part formula: anticipation, preparation, and punchline, where the anticipation and preparation quietly build a pattern, and the punchline snaps that pattern in an unexpected direction. Which brings us to a specific version of this formula, so common it has its own name: the rule of 3. Set up 2 similar items or actions establishing a clear pattern, then break that exact pattern with a 3rd item that violates it, and the resulting contrast is what actually produces the laugh. It's why so many classic jokes involve exactly 3 units, 3 men on a desert island, 3 items on a list, 3 attempts at the same task. The first item establishes a pattern, the second confirms it, and the third detonates it. Comedy writers have used some version of this rule for so long, across stand-up, sketch, and sitcom writing alike, that it's treated less like a stylistic trick and more like a load-bearing wall of the entire craft. Callbacks work almost like a version of this same principle stretched across an entire episode, or even an entire season. A joke or phrase planted early gets reintroduced later, in a completely different context, and the laugh it earns the second time isn't really about the line itself. It's about the audience's private satisfaction in recognizing something they weren't sure would ever come back. This is also, not coincidentally, one of the main reasons sitcoms lean so heavily on recurring catchphrases and running jokes. A joke repeated across episodes, gradually escalating or twisting slightly each time it returns, builds a kind of insider knowledge between the show and its most loyal viewers, turning simple repetition into a genuine reward for paying attention. None of this architecture works, though, without the final ingredient: characters specifically engineered to generate friction with each other simply by existing in the same room. Sitcom writers frequently talk about building an ensemble where every character represents a distinct, exaggerated personality trait or worldview, so that placing any two of them together in a scene automatically creates tension without the writers needing to invent an elaborate external plot to force it. A rigid, rule-obsessed character paired with a chaotic, rule-breaking one. An optimist paired with a cynic. Someone desperate to be liked paired with someone who couldn't care less what anyone thinks. Comedy writing guides frequently describe this as designing characters who are, quote, driven by their traits, rather than characters who simply have traits. Meaning a well-built sitcom character isn't randomly quirky, they're consistently, predictably themselves, which is exactly what allows an audience to anticipate how they'll react to any given obstacle, and exactly what allows the writers to reliably generate conflict out of pure personality alone, episode after episode, without needing to reinvent the wheel every single week. None of this architecture, though, gets built by a single person sitting alone at a keyboard, which is itself part of the formula that rarely gets discussed. Most sitcoms are constructed inside what's called a writer's room, a group of anywhere from a handful to dozens of writers working collaboratively, pitching jokes out loud, testing lines against each other in real time, before a single word ever reaches an actor. A script typically goes through a process writers call punching up, where an already completed draft gets passed around the room specifically so each joke can be challenged, rephrased, or replaced with something sharper. It's a deliberately adversarial, iterative process, closer to a group of engineers stress-testing a bridge than a single author polishing a poem, and it's one of the main reasons sitcom dialogue often feels so densely, relentlessly funny, line after line, in a way that would be almost impossible for one writer to sustain alone across an entire season. There's also a specific character role worth naming, one that almost every successful ensemble includes, even when it isn't obvious at first glance: the voice of reason. Comedy writing guides describe this as the character whose relatively grounded, sensible perspective exists specifically to expose just how absurd everyone else's behavior actually is, without at least one character calibrated closer to how a normal person might actually react. An ensemble of purely exaggerated personalities risks feeling untethered. A room full of cartoon logic with nothing to bounce off of. The voice of reason doesn't have to be the funniest character in the room, and often isn't, but they're doing quiet structural work, giving the audience a stand-in perspective from which the rest of the ensemble's chaos actually reads as funny rather than simply strange. It's worth being honest that this formula isn't bulletproof, and plenty of critics have pointed out exactly where it tends to break down. Some sitcoms, particularly in the more comfort-driven, low-conflict style that became popular in the 2010s, have been criticized for softening their internal and external obstacles so much that episodes end with characters simply hugging out their differences and reaffirming how much they love each other, undercutting the very friction the format depends on to generate laughs in the first place. When the conflict gets too gentle, the entire engine stalls, no matter how likable the ensemble is. And this is exactly why the shows that endure tend to be the ones that trust the formula's harder edges rather than sanding them down. The friction between want and obstacle. The quiet law that nothing permanently changes. The exact rhythm of anticipation and payoff inside a single joke. None of that is a coincidence, and none of it is old-fashioned. It's simply the architecture comedy discovered works, tested and refined across 70 years of television, hiding in plain sight underneath every single sitcom you've ever loved, whether it's set in a bar, an office, or a police precinct, that somehow always ends up right back where it started, right back where it started, right back